All right, guys, welcome to our third week of class. This lecture is going to cover football from the 1960s through the 1980s. It's going to talk a lot about pro football and then a lot of the technical aspects through the development of college football. So, guys, as we're entering around 1950, we had around 6 million TV sets in use in the U.S. And in 1951, the NFL started putting in a blackout rule, which started blacking out games. The 1958 championship game between the Colts and the Giants was watched by about a fourth of the U.S. population. The Colts won it in overtime. Johnny Unitas is basically credited with having the first 2-minute drill in that game. It's considered one of the greatest games of all time. And in that game alone, there were 17 people associated with the Hall of Fame that were participating in that game. During this lecture, we're going to have several profiles. Some of you guys did some research on Vince Lombardi, pretty much wrote the Bible on football, came up with this concept of the Green Bay power sweep where he pulled guards, which is very common today. Was credited with turning losing teams into powerhouses. He pioneered scouting using Polaroid pictures from the booth to look at formations, and obviously we named the Lombardi Trophy after him. In the 50s and 60s, in 1958, the NFL got its first attempt at competition with the AFL. So the AFL was around for about 9 years. And the AFL brought teams to Denver, Kansas City, Miami, and San Diego. To counter that, the NFL added teams in Atlanta and in Minneapolis. So basically between 1959 and 1961, pro teams doubled to about 24, and we got about 10 times more TVs and households. And the first 1965 was the first Harris poll that showed football as being the number one spectator sport in the U.S. The first Super Bowl was in 1967, and then 1970 we basically finalized the merger between the AFL and the NFL, which created the NFL that we see today. The 1960s were also still a vital time or a pivotal time for the continued integration of black players into the sport. Some technical advancements through the 1960s, the shotgun formation, credited at San Francisco with Red Hickey. Continued growth and use of the I formation, mainly an offset type of I. Two platoon football still very big. The veer option, which was first credited with Bill Yeoman at Houston. The wishbone triple offense, which was created by Emory Ballard. Darrell Roll at Texas was a very prominent use of this, and Barry Switzer at Oklahoma. And then the Green Bay sweep, which was pioneered by Vince Lombardi. Pete Rozelle, who was one of the first commissioners of the NFL, basically is credited with making the NFL what it is today. He somehow made a capitalist country and used socialism to make it work in the NFL. And that sounds weird, but it's what it basically means, guys. The NFL shares revenue from TV, and he's the one that credited that. So in our normal way of doing things, you're in a capitalist society, which we're blessed to live in. You can make money as much as you want to make and do what you want to do with it. What Rozelle saw is that in order for small market teams like Green Bay, in order to be able to exist and compete with teams like New York, they were going to have to figure out a way to even the playing field. And so he's credited with starting revenue sharing. And in 1962, CBS paid $4.6 million for the media rights to the NFL. At about the same time, Joe Namath came into the league. He was drafted in '65 from Alabama. he's really considered the first really star of football on and off the field. He was brash. He was cocky. He guaranteed a Super Bowl victory in Super Bowl III. He was the first person to really do stuff off the field. He was in the Brady Bunch, for instance. And he kind of ushered in the aspect of the game with flashy players. He was really the first flashy player in the NFL. The 1970s are considered the golden age of the NFL. You had more TV coverage. Obviously, you had the perfect season from the 72 Dolphins. And you had these great teams and great squads, the Fearsome Foursome in Los Angeles, the Steel Curtain defense in Pittsburgh, the Purple People Eaters, which is the defense in Minnesota. And this really came to life through NFL films. You had your first Monday Night Football game in 1974 and your first attempt at a football video game through Atari. 1970 saw continued evolution in the game. You saw Oklahoma's use of the wishbone, the flex eye. The NCAA started creating different divisions. You saw the growth of defenses like 4-3 with stunts, 3-4 defense, the 5-2, the 4-4, the nickel defense, and the use of trap option. All of those innovations came during the 1970s. 1980s were kind of a rough time for football. You had another attempt at competition through the United States Football League. It only lasted 2 years, but Steve Young, a prominent future Hall of Famer, was paid $40 million. You also had strikes in 1982 and 1987. You had teams that moved. Oakland moved to Los Angeles. Baltimore moved to Indianapolis. St. Louis moved to Arizona. So a lot of strife in the 1980s in football. And you continue to see innovations. You saw West Coast passing, zone blocking, Joe Gibbs' use of the H-back in power football, the flex bone, which you see at Georgia Southern, Nebraska I option, the no huddle option or offense, and then dime defenses. All of these were innovations that came to be in the 1980s. So that 20 or 30 year span, guys, pretty prominent. This being holiday week, you'll have a discussion, but it'll only be a response. You'll still have an assignment due, guys. Let's finish this thing up strong.